So you see that human body over there? It's dynamic and interesting. And what if you want to draw it nice and stiff and boring, just like a lot of people do draw the human body? There's a great technique a lot of people use, which is to think of the human body like an action figure instead of like a real human body. There are specific things that people change so that your figures can look more like this and less like that. So what can those changes be? One is the shoulders, right? So if you look at that guy over there, his shoulders, right? So let's say we've got his kind of rib cage here. His shoulder, this shoulder nearer us, has pivoted up like that. So the whole shoulder now is up here. And then that means that these muscles are going to this higher position. The shoulders pivoted in towards the ear. There's a lot of interesting dynamics happening around that shoulder. And then the head is tilted down forward so that it's down here, behind, and kind of almost below that shoulder, right? Which is cool and which is interesting and which is dynamic. So what if we compare that to this, which is how a lot of people think about shoulders and even teach shoulders, right? So instead of the shoulder pivoting from right here in the pit of the neck and the shoulder coming up in towards the ear, and then the arm raising up from there, you just raise the arm from this static position as if the shoulder is stuck on the side in a sort of just has the ball joint and doesn't have all this range of motion from here where, you know, you can roll your shoulders, you can shrug your shoulders go up and down, pivot around, right? So in this case, we're going to have a sort of torso, and then we'll have the arm kind of like a ball on the side, and then the arm goes up like that, right? Now, the next thing that can happen is the neck is this static cylinder, and the head just moves around as if the head is like on a stick, right? The stick sticks out of the torso, and then the head just kind of pivots around. So you can think of the head as just pivoting like it's a kind of lollipop type of thing on a stick, all right? So then the neck sticks out, and what we don't get is how the neck can actually, like let's say we have a rib cage, the neck can like protrude forward and the head can look down from there. The neck can go sideways, the neck can do loads of things. So instead of the shoulder raising up and the neck coming down, we just have the shoulder stay this way and the neck goes straight up. And this is going to make things nice and boring in our stiff figure, right? So it's just this and this kind of thing. Super nice and robotic, all right? And then in the torso, so much of the gesture that we see is happening in the torso, right? So we've got, in the real body, we've got that rib cage shape, and then the hips have come forward. So we get that rounding of the back like this, and then you get kind of a squash here. So we get that kind of squash and stretch, all right? In the action figure, they do not prioritize any movement at the torso, all right? Even though it's called an action figure, and most of the action, even though it's subtle, most of the action in any pose is happening in the torso, the trunk, and maybe in the neck, right? They just prioritize the limbs, which is strange because that really isn't where a lot of the action happens. I mean, it's not a terrible idea because you can do lots of story like this, but if you wanted it to be dynamic, you would prioritize movement here, you know? All right, so instead of having this sort of thing, you would just have it like a sort of block, all right? So we've got this kind of blocky torso with the shoulder stuck on the side as a sort of ball joint that does that. And then the head is on a stick on the neck, so it's just up here like this. So it's very nice and robotic, like you can see that feels good and robotic. All right, great. Okay, so what else could we do? Well, one thing is we could allow this kind of movement, but not any kind of sideways movement. And I want to show you another action figure here, which I think is way superior in terms of natural looking movement, even though it, you know, look, because I'm not trying to criticize action figure people here, like they can't build full shoulder structures and stuff like that, and it's not a priority, I guess, for kids to play that they have dynamic torsos and things. But I do think that this is a really good toy for a couple of reasons. All right, one is that the legs, they don't just move this way, but they can do a little bit of this. And it's so amazing how if your arms can do a little bit of this and your legs can do a little bit of this, how much more natural those poses can feel. And then the pivoting of the neck is not just like a head rotating on a stick. The neck itself can pivot, right? So you can have these really great movements that feel supernatural. So this is one of my favorite of my son's toys, and I keep telling him this is the best one, but he thinks this is the best one, and he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? He doesn't know. All right, so you want to have this kind of noticing these kinds of movements. Okay, so the next thing is to look at the profile of your action figure and notice that it's very much like a straight line, right? So it's kind of like this, right? Going up. There's the head on top of the torso. There's the butt. They don't have butts for some reason. There's very little glutes. They've got enormous muscles apart from their glutes. I guess it would look weird if he had a big butt. But anyway, big muscular people often have big glutes. So what we can now do then is compare that to a real body where the rib cage tilts back, the hips come forward. They do have glutes. The neck sticks more forward like that. This is just in a neutral standing pose like this. And then on the legs, they start like this, but then they really come back as they come down towards the feet. All right, so there's a lot more kind of going ding, 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 ding along the body rather than it being like a straight line like this. So that's another thing. And then obviously because of the constraints here, they can only mold, it once basically, right? Everything is tense. All the muscles are tense. Like the bicep here, if you look at the bicep shape, it's really bulging out, like incredibly so. And this is quite strange because this is a straight arm. So you'd expect the tricep to be bulging out and the bicep to be more stretched and more flat. So thinking about when you're thinking, let's say you're thinking about an arm. If you've got an arm that's bent, that tricep will stretch out and then the bicep will shorten and bulge like this. Whereas if you've got an arm that is straight, the tricep will bulge out and then the bicep, will kind of stretch out a little bit like this. And so having these kinds of dynamics in your musculature based on what the arm or whatever is actually doing, having the muscles stretch up or squash and compress to the, based on what's happening, is something you can do in drawings that action figure creators can't do because they don't know what pose this character is going to be in, right? It's supposed to be posable. And so you want to make your drawings not look like action figures. You want them to have more of this movement in, out, neck flexibility, shoulder pivots, pivoting round, being pulled forward, being pulled back. You don't want this kind of stiffness. You want lots of movement in the torso, right? So if you have, you can have a pose where the rib cage is facing this way and the hips are facing the other way. So there's a twist going up the torso, and then you can have a raised shoulder and then the chest has to now stretch up to go there, you want to be able to have a rounded back, right? And so pivot that rib cage forward, and that means a squash along the tummy like this. You want to be able to have your arms, the muscles in the arms stretch or contract depending on what the arm is actually doing. You know, you want to be able to have the head and then have the neck kind of do different or interesting things like people really do. So in order to make sure that your drawings are super stiff and boring, think of them like this. If you want them to be dynamic, just have a slightly better mannequin or idea of what the human figure, how the human figure works in your head, and you'll be able to do so much. You know, even just saying that there can be a little bit of a squash and stretch in the torso like this, and you know, maybe one of the legs can be turned out a little bit so that we're looking at the side of that one, but we're looking at the front of this one, and there's a little bit of twisting happening, you know. And then yeah, you can, let's say we raise this shoulder, that means the whole shoulder's going to pivot, right? Maybe this person's sniffing their armpits, I don't know. All right, so in order to have, if you want to have dynamic figures, really try not to think of the figure as working like this, which is how most people default to. And I see it actually in some textbooks, which is kind of alarming. And try to think about a better dynamic version of the figure. So by the way, if you want to learn how to simplify the figure and look for the things that really matter, we do have a free mini course called Fresh Eyes. It is really good, even if I do say so myself. So check out the link below. And if you really want to get into it, if you really want to take your drawing seriously, join our study group. You get one-to-one feedback. You get all our courses. They're really concise and well designed, and they'll take you from the most basics of drawing all the way through to stuff like shape and edge design to make your stuff look really, really cool. And you get courses, live sessions, one-to-one feedback. It's incredible value, again, even if I do say so myself. And then there's another video for you up on the screen just for you, so check it out and I'll see you over there.